Meh, baby girl? Meh, meh, meh? Oh, hello, monkey. Just a monkey. What are you doing? What are you doing? Huh? What are you doing? Okay. So you gonna read this? You gonna read this? No? No, don't knock the camera over. We got it pointed at Cleo, at the Chrome Kitty. I am with you in the whispering of the wind, with you in the first moments of dawn, watching over you as the moon travels the night sky kissed by the stars. I am there in the liquid moments between dreams and waking, in the pause between breaths, the warm caress of the sun as it smiles upon the day, touched by the morning's dew. I am there. She's a beautiful lady. Yeah, that's a beautiful lady. The storm. She woke up that midsummer morning and felt as frustrated as the day looked. The sky was constipated with dark, angry clouds. It was going to rain. The anger of the weather mirrored the emotions she could not express because she couldn't feel them anymore. She sat on the seat in front of the bedroom's bay window and silently watched the storm swallow the morning sky. Her two cats, Riff and Raff, were curled up together near her feet. The blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders had slipped and left her shoulders bare. They were cold, but she never noticed. Long ago she had quit feeling anything. Even the tears she cried would go untouched as they slid down her cheeks. Her husband, frustrated at his inability to help her, hadn't reached out to her in months. When he did check on her, he smelled like alcohol. She wished he could see that she still needed him, that it was just her inability to communicate what she wanted that wouldn't let her ask for help. Her guilt kept her trapped in a dark world that refused to let her go. Whoops. Are you going to bite me? She knew her husband blamed himself for her withdrawn state. It made her feel helpless that she was unable to let him think otherwise. No one was to blame. It was just how things had ended up for her. Time was supposed to heal all wounds, but she had lost hope in that thought. The wound that caused her so much pain would not heal and stayed fresh in her mind from day to day. She didn't seem to be able to care about anything. She should have cared that her husband had moved into the spare bedroom. She had wanted to, but to avoid the pain she had blocked out his desertion. When he had tried to explain why he had left, she hadn't wanted to hear what he said. He had said that they would both be more comfortable in beds of their own. That, because she constantly tossed and turned, it interrupted them both when they slept together. It didn't seem to matter to him that it was her dreams, filled with images that disturbed her, that made her move around all night. He had been right, but he had lied to her. Although it had been uncomfortable to sleep together, that wasn't the real reason he didn't share their room anymore. She knew he had gotten tired of waking up alone to find her curled up on the window seat, staring blankly out the window and not responding when he asked her if she was okay. So she had only drawn herself further inward as she accepted his absence, because she didn't seem to be able to respond to him. How could she tell him of the darkness that had taken over her heart, or express feelings she felt she no longer possessed? She was unable to say, "I love you," because she couldn't remember what love felt like anymore. That emotion had flown away like a butterfly chased by the storm she watched. She had fallen down a dark well without hope of rescue. Her inability to call for help had caused her husband to pull away to protect himself, because he thought she no longer wanted him around. The sound of her husband, as he began his day, barely registered. The shower mirrored the rain as it began to fall. Memories of pleasant times in the shower teased her inability to react. She wanted to remember. It would make her smile, but she had forgotten how. Happy memories should have elicited that smile, but they only made her feel cold, turn to stone, and draw further inward. She wished she could jump up, race into the bathroom, and join him. Once there, she would say, "I'm all better now. I've missed you so much, and I love you." But a chasm had opened up between them, and she didn't have the tools to build a bridge to his side. All she seemed able to do was sit and watch as her husband, like her life, walked away from her. 20 minutes later, she heard the front door slam. The noise echoed through the house. She flinched. It startled the cats as well. He had left to go to work. She knew he would stay late again. There he sought refuge from the bleakness that filled their once happy home. She cried as big drops of rain splat against the window. It made her angry that all she seemed to be able to do was sit and cry. Sadness and anger filled every nook and cranny of her days. It made it impossible to do anything constructive with her time, and she had given up trying. Instead, she took up residence in a mud puddle of depression. There she wallowed in the feel of it as it squished between her toes, only to be trapped by its clingy feel. The dark water swirled over her head as it dragged her down into its depths. Her disappointment then stood on her shoulders and used her as a life preserver as she slowly disappeared. There seemed to be nothing here for her anymore. The rain continued to fall heavily against the window. She watched as puddles formed on the path that led into the forest behind her house. Each drop that splashed in the puddles made them grow larger. Soon a childhood memory made them look like fairy ponds. The magic of the moment captured her attention, and she forgot to be withdrawn. Her thoughts turned to images of a fairy flying with reckless abandon through the forest, without a care in the world to weigh it down. It would be wonderful to be that carefree and allowed to be whatever she wanted. That thought made her pause. What did she want? She was shocked to find that she didn't know what she wanted. Before now, all she had wanted to do was hide and be anywhere but where the pain existed. It had been why she had withdrawn to the sanctuary of the window seat. She had put her left hand on the window. The coolness of it... Shall we start again? She put her left hand on the window. The coolness of it was sharp against the warm skin of her palm. It was then that she realized she hadn't found a sanctuary. She had built herself a prison. Her withdrawal had become the bars of a cell door which had clanged behind her. No wonder she flinched every time her husband slammed the door when he left the house. It was a subtle reminder of the trap she hadn't realized she had fallen into. How had that happened? Slowly the answer revealed itself to her. She had given up the belief that she was strong enough to handle what life could throw at her. It shocked her more to know that this had happened long ago. With both hands on the window, her blanket now around her waist, she leaned close to the glass, and her nose squashed against its surface. Her breath fogged around her face, and for a moment it blocked out the world. Then, for the first time in days, she laughed. Really laughed. The sound seemed so strained and far away at first, and far away. At first she wasn't sure that it had come from her. It surprised her that she was still able to laugh. She had thought she had forgotten how. However, the sensation of her nose flat against the glass had reminded her of a time when she was little. She and her younger sister had used a glass sliding door as a television and made up programs to entertain themselves. Each of them would take turns to perform on their side of the door. That day she had laughed so hard at the funny faces her sister had made as she squashed her face against glass. It had almost made her pee her pants. The memory made the smile on her face grow bigger. Riff and Raff, who had resettled after the shock of the door when it had slammed, now looked at her like she had gone insane. Their big yellow eyes were round with concern, but she was unable to stop the laughter that bubbled out of her. The memory of her sister's face, distorted by the glass, continued to dance in her mind. Soon all that laughter made her cough. She tried not to choke and managed to stop long enough to reassure both cats that she was okay. One at a time, she picked them up and held them close. Words of love came more easily that day than had in so many days before. Then it struck her that she hadn't only neglected herself, but she had robbed Riff and Raff of the love she had given them before she had withdrawn. That would have to change. They deserved better. They had never left her side for very long. She realized she had taken their company for granted and had assumed they would always be there. It amazed her that, although she hadn't been able to love them as much as she should have, they were there for her. It was as if they knew she needed them, and although she wasn't okay now, one day she would be. As long as she needed them, they would not leave their posts. Thankfully, her husband had been there to make sure their needs were taken care of. She certainly hadn't. She started to feel guilty and then stopped herself. Riff and Raff needed her to get herself together, not drown herself in more guilt. Then she smiled a big smile. Her little darlings deserved something for their unconditional kindness. For the first time that day, she got up. Her legs felt stiff, for she had sat too long, but she was going to give the cats a treat. It would never make up for the time she had lost with them, but it was a start. Going downstairs, she never felt her feet touch the floor. It was like she floated. Simple act of finding a purpose had given her wings. She now knew that Riff and Raff needed her. They needed her to live, to thrive, and bring light into their lives, the same way they brought all that into her life. Depression had deprived them of that. Then she thought of her husband. She paused. She had robbed him as well. But the cats seemed to have been the only ones not to demand more than she had been able to give. They were just happy to be with her. Riff and Raff would be where she would start. She could feel her mood change. Outside the wind continued to roar, and the rain hadn't stopped pelting the house. She stood in the gray light of her unlit kitchen and listened to the power of it. The storm was getting wilder. The cats who had followed her into the kitchen, curious to see where she was going, now looked at her with apprehension in their eyes. Storms had always made them nervous, but this one was noisier than normal. Thunder crashed loudly and made the dishes in the cupboards rattle. She cooed words of comfort to Riff and Raff as she opened a can of fish for them, to reassure them that everything was okay. By the time she had heaped their plates full and put them on the floor, she was singing. The cats listened to the lullabies as they looked confusedly at each other. It wasn't time for dinner. However, as they didn't wish to miss out on an opportunity to eat, they dove into their food and gobbled up every last morsel. Finished with their meal and filled with satisfaction, they cleaned themselves. Then, as she bent down to pick up the plates, she noticed that they purred. She had forgotten how lovely that sound was. It was a deep, rumbling reassurance that the world would always be okay. She put the empty plates in the sink and then reached down to pet each furry body. The cats purred louder. She began to cry again and felt the tears slide down her cheeks. She left them wet upon her face because they were proof she was alive. The cats, with their tummies full, went to look for a place to curl up and sleep away the storm. It continued to rage around the house, around the outside of the house, like an angry child looking for attention. Rip and Raph had left her alone in the gloom of the kitchen, but she didn't feel alone. With an impulsive move, she opened the kitchen door and went out into the storm. Only in her thin cotton nightgown, she was hit by the full force of its intensity. Her bare feet met the wet pavement, and her toes curled at its coldness, but she didn't care. Neither did she care that she had left the door open, nor that the rain soaked her nightgown and made it cling to her body. The wind blew all around her. The fierceness of the storm made her feel more alive than she had in a long time. The energy of it filled every inch of her spirit. She turned in circles, arms stretched out to capture the feel of it. When she paused, she remembered the fairy. The forest eagerly awaited her. Her bare feet splashed through every puddle as she followed the path that led into the forest. She had become the fairy. Once inside the forest, she stopped and enjoyed nature at its most raw and primal. The wind violently rocked the trees back and forth. It didn't frighten her because she felt at peace with everything around her. She hadn't felt this connected to something bigger than herself since she was a child. The storm had cleansed not only her body but her spirit as well. The rain still fell heavily as she looked straight up into the stormy sky. She raised her arms and screamed. It was an animal scream torn joyously from her body. The storm answered her howl with one of its own. It now accepted her as part of itself and the magic of all things natural. Then the sun broke free of the darkness. At first it was a shock to her senses. The brightness of it felt too bright. Soon the air around her began to warm up, and she wrapped herself in it like a blanket. She watched as the clouds parted to amaze her with the bluest sky she had ever seen. Slowly she walked back to her house and paused in every puddle along the way. She knew she wanted to capture the moment and remember it later. She memorized the way the air smelled and the way the sunlight had looked when it burst through the dark clouds. It had been like the gates of heaven opening up for all to see the glory of that special place. Time had seemed to stand still for her in that moment. She reached her backyard and watched as the sun set. It stretched shadows over her and the house as it disappeared behind the forest. Then she watched the clouds that remained change color and shape to form pictures in the sky. She thought she saw an oak tree. Then it turned into a dragon. The clouds continued to shift and melt together, causing the bottom of the cloud formation to turn a brilliant orange. From that rose a magnificent bird with wings spread, ready to soar into the heavens. It resembled the picture she had seen of phoenixes. The phoenix seemed to rise from the ashes of the storm. She stood there and watched as it flew away. Her eyes widened as a thought occurred to her. She too could rise from the ashes of her life and be brighter than all the darkness that had taken her prisoner. She could be strong enough to try again and not let life pass her by. With that thought, she walked into her house, through the open door, and across the kitchen floor that now bore witness to the fury of the storm. She stopped in the middle of the kitchen and dripped water from her nightgown onto the muddy floor. The mud had followed her inside on her bare feet. She looked wild, like a creature born of that storm. Her husband came home to find her like that. An eerie feeling had come over him at work, which made him want to come home early. Something inside him had said, "Go home." That had worried him so much he had been scared by it. Then, when he had come through the front door and had seen the back one wide open, he had begun to fear the worst. He had hoped that it had been the storm that had blown it open, and his wife would be safe upstairs, locked in the distance where she had retreated from him so long ago. He also hoped both cats were inside. Before he went upstairs to check on his wife, he entered the kitchen to close the door. It was then he spotted her and stopped abruptly. She looked mystical in the faded light of the day. He couldn't bring himself to turn on a light, for he feared the light would destroy the vision before him. There seemed to be an air of magic about her. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Then she started to shake and said, "I need you." He took her in his arms. Although she was wet and cold, he didn't care. The sound of her voice was so wonderful, he was mesmerized by it. While she cried, he held her tightly. He didn't want to let her down like he had so many times before. Before long, she became calm. She looked up into his eyes, and in her upturned face, he saw all the love he had missed for so long. She saw his eyes light up and knew that he still loved her. He gently wiped the tears from her face and then kissed her. It was a long, slow kiss. They reacquainted themselves with it and savored every moment. They had missed each other very much. It was then that she realized that time doesn't heal all wounds. It just had put distance between her and her pain. Distance which had allowed freedom for her spirit to learn to fly again and find reckoning with a sense of hope. The storm had awakened her. It had shown her how to feel again. And she, too, was strong enough to deal with her life. The way the sun had come out from behind the clouds after the storm was over had shown her that there was always hope. She just had to believe. The kiss helped her reaffirm that she had plenty in her life to hang on to and hope for. Riff and Raff meowed loudly as they rubbed up against the couple's legs. They wanted attention and to be part of the happiness. Besides, it was time to eat again. She and her husband laughed. The wonderfulness of it filled the house. It felt good to have it filled with happiness for a change. As she went to get the cats their dinner, her husband turned on the light and closed the kitchen door. These simple tasks reminded her that no matter what, life went on. Life, although messy sometimes, was going to be all right. And with that thought, she gave Riff and Raff their plates of food. Then she walked over to her husband. He stood with the mop in his hand, ready to clean up the mess she had left on the floor. She smiled at him and took the mop from him. It was her turn to clean things up. She had just started to mop when the amused look on her husband's face made her look down. In the glow of the kitchen light, they both could see her feet. They laughed again. First she would have to clean up herself. She was a mess. Thank you for listening. Bye.